Hey guys, welcome back to part two here of imperialism. Again, as we continue to push on through the school closings that we're going through right now. This is part two of our imperialism unit that we're looking at. And now, when we left, we finished talking about China and the open door policies. And now we're going to look more at what President Roosevelt had to do. If you recall, President McKinley unfortunately was assassinated in 1901 by an anarchist who decided that he didn't like government in general. And at this point, after the death of McKinley, Teddy Roosevelt will become the President of the United States. Teddy Roosevelt was defined by many things. As you recall from some of the notes, he is a person who just lives life to the fullest. He believes it's far better to wear out than to rust out, he says. And anything he does, he wants to experience with the full vigor of life. He said, I want to go out and experience everything humanly possible that I can. And he took that kind of outgoing, extroverted attitude to the White House. And when he went to the White House, he became known on the foreign policy side as the guy that came up with the quote of speak softly and carry a big stick. And what basically that means is that you should always have the use of force as an option, but maybe you should try to do diplomacy first. But again, having that use of force as an option is always a positive if you're Roosevelt, because then if you don't get the things that you want, you may have to be able to use said force to be able to change people's minds, let's say. Imperialists at this time love Teddy Roosevelt. They think that what he is doing is just a continuation of the processes that we've been going through these last few years as America has become more of a muscular player on the world scene, so to speak. Some of his critics, though, will go back and say, hey, don't you recall what George Washington said in his farewell address here in 1796, where he warns of avoiding these foreign entanglements, of avoiding alliances. Don't get your nose out there in other people's business. But Teddy Roosevelt kind of blows apart those arguments and, as he is pretty much ought to do, goes right on through and decides to do his own thing and what he feels like is in the best interest of the United States. The first thing he really decides to flex those muscles with is the Panama Canal. If you know anything about your geography, if you go down to South America, one of the northernmost countries of South America is the nation of Colombia. And part of Colombia is attached now, and was back then too, was attached to a little isthmus, a small area known as Panama. Panama was part of Colombia at this point. And Teddy Roosevelt really wanted to go in and be able to dig a canal through Panama. Because if he was able to dig a canal through Panama, he would be able to connect these new U.S. won possessions from the Spanish-American War. If you recall from your AMSCO reading, we have territories in the Caribbean going all the way over to the Philippines, 7,000 plus miles away. Instead of having to sail all the way down the tip of South America and go all the way to the Pacific, it's better to go through than to go around. The problem is Colombia didn't really want to play ball the way Roosevelt thought that they should play. They were demanding more money, more say over the canal, and Roosevelt just decided that enough was enough. And so in early 1903, he engineers a rebellion by the Panamanian inhabitants of that area against the government of Colombia. And when this rebellion occurs, mysteriously, the U.S. Navy is just right off the coast of Panama, and the rebellion succeeds with nary a casualty for the United States. And at that point, with an independent country of Panama, we were able to negotiate the big treaty that we came up with, known as the Hay-Bonavaria Treaty. Say that one 3 times fast. And what this gave the United States was the ability to have complete control of what were later referred to as the Panama Canal Zone. So we would get exclusive rights to dig the zone and maintain the zone. And digging on this zone begins in about 1904. Remember, the French had tried to do this, and they failed. And part of the reason they failed was, A, it was very expensive, but B, the yellow fever epidemic came through, and we didn't know why people were dying from yellow fever at this point in time. But fortunately, thanks to people like Dr. Gorgas, who you read about, he was able to isolate that it came from mosquitoes, and we were able to take proactive measures to deal with those issues so that yellow fever, the epidemic, did not survive in Panama, and we were able to continue our digs. Remember, too, as we did this, we had to go back and break a treaty with Great Britain that had existed since 1850, where no one would try to dig a canal without the permission of the other, and we would have shared ownership of this area. So we eventually did one known as the Hay-Pauncefote Treaty, and that was 1901, that gave us the exclusive right to dig the canal. So we get the right to dig the canal. We negotiate with Colombia. They decide they don't want to play ball the way Roosevelt wants them to play ball. And what they end up doing instead is starting a rebellion with Panama, and Panama is more than happy to sign off on the treaty. So now we start digging the canal. The canal starts being dug in 1904, and in fact, a little fun fact that they don't put in the AMSCO book here is that Teddy Roosevelt is the first president to ever leave the United States on a foreign trip. He was so fascinated with the idea of seeing a canal dug in Panama that he wanted to see it himself. He's not going to rely on someone else to tell him all about it. He said he wanted to go down there and, quote, see the dirt fly. So there's this great picture that I'll share with you a little bit later of him in an all-white suit sitting in one of the earth movers, actually moving the earth himself, because, again, why would you want to miss out on a chance to do something that cool if you're Teddy Roosevelt? All right, if we a little bit later on, though, what we'll find out, too, is that the U.S. government felt a little bit of, I guess, what we call a guilty conscience, and they agreed later on in 1921 to pay Colombia a grand total of about $25 million to kind of make up for the loss of Panama at that point in time. As we go forward, let's look a little bit, and again, I'm looking potentially at the graphic organizer that you received on Friday. So we're on the backside now. And this becomes one of the big foreign policy debates in American history. Some people will say it's a great addition. Others will say it is a twisting of the Monroe Doctrine. But what we end up having is what we refer to as the Roosevelt Corollary of the Monroe Doctrine. In a nutshell, what was going on at this time is that several Latin American and South American countries were in deep debt to European nations. And European nations decided that the best way to get their money back was to actually send ships over to South America, occupy their major ports, collect taxes, and use that money to pay off the debts. It would be the equivalent of someone coming to your house if you were in debt, intercepting all of your shipping and everything else, your packages from Amazon, turn around and selling those packages for money, and then pocketing the money to pay off your debt. So if you look at it from Roosevelt's perspective, this is something that can't be allowed to fly if we believe in the Monroe Doctrine. If we're going to allow Europe to come over here in South America and other parts of Latin America and set up a presence until they can collect all the taxes, who's to say they'll ever leave? So Roosevelt decides, rather than have them come to places like Venezuela and the Dominican Republic and set up shop, what Teddy Roosevelt decided to do was say the United States would be the debt collector, so to speak. He basically told Europe at this point, hands off, stay away. What we'll do is we'll occupy parts of these ports, and we will collect the tax money. And when we get the tax money collected, we'll send it to you. But the big key takeaway is you have to make sure that you stay on your side of the Atlantic Ocean. We'll take care of the tax duties from there. This is a major shift. There's a lot of historians that have argued this is not what Monroe was thinking when he came up with the Monroe Doctrine. However, this keeps in Roosevelt's mind the integrity of the Monroe Doctrine, because remember, it is only as strong as you're willing to enforce it at any given point. So please make sure you know this is a radical change from Monroe's Doctrine, and it's known as the Roosevelt Corollary. We'll get much more involved with that when we get to the 1960s and the Cuban Missile Crisis, so more on that to come. We will take this corollary and we'll be able to use it to intervene in several places in South America and Latin America, the Caribbean, so notably Haiti, Honduras, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua. In our minds, we're doing it to protect the legitimacy of the Monroe Doctrine and keep Europe out. To the South Americans, in their perspective, this is what they refer to as the Yankee Colossus that is always interfering and intervening in their affairs. And it will breed a certain amount of hostility toward the United States, and we'll get into that a little bit later on in our next video where we talk about the United States becoming more involved in East Asia, China, and Japan. See you soon.